Hello. Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and today I am going to be talking about type in video and type how it relates to video, title slides, lower thirds, all that good stuff, that good. This is not going to be a tutorial, it's more of like an overview, a summary of the different contents and how to incorporate text into your videos. This is stuff that's going to apply across whatever program that you're using. It's not really dependent on being Adobe or DaVinci or whatever. This is just general concepts. So there's three main parts or points to this video. First of all, it's going to be hierarchy. Second is going to be sizing, which kind of leads into the third part, which is the readability. Why am I, what? I can't even count, don't listen to this video. That's the third one, readability, and there's some subsections within readability which I'm going to delve into some of the details on. Let's dive right in and get started. So the first step, and this might seem obvious, it is obvious, but it's important to ask yourself this because it's really easy to get overwhelmed and bogged down with the different types of ways you're going to be using text in your film. I think about that way too in advance, more than I should or more than I need to, and this is really something you should be doing at the end as more of just like part of finishing the project itself, putting the last touches on it because you want it to match the feeling of the film, of the completed film. The goal or the feeling that you're trying to achieve through your film. You want the text to match that, and the text is supposed to be used to enhance that. So, you know, a good example in my opinion would be thinking about horror movies. So if you look at some of the titles I have here, you know, you aren't gonna see like Comic Sans with a horror movie, although it could be a horror movie. Comic Sans is pretty bad. But you're not gonna see like a fun, playful font with a horror movie. You're gonna see something either more clean and specific, like with Hereditary, or something really designed and specific, like maybe something with Night Stalker, which again that's not really a horror movie, but it's creepy, you know, like Dateline-esque type of movie on Netflix that is creepy. That was thoughtful. That was something that was intentional and thought out. When someone sees that title, they get a specific feeling and it goes along with the film, and they have a certain expectation for the film of like what it might look like or what it might feel like. So that's another reason why it's really important to consider that when you are looking at different fonts for whatever your title is. All of this feeds into the biggest point, the main point, the number one thing to know, the number one thing to think about is hierarchy. 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 That is the most important thing. It is fundamental to the readability and establishing importance in whatever text slide you have in your film. So whatever is in the biggest font size on a text slide, that's what people are going to remember. You can put whatever details you want in like the smaller text below it. Whatever you have in the smalls around it, people aren't going to remember. That's why on most credit sequences, if it says directed by Sarah Martinez, directed by isn't huge and then my name's really small, because you're not, one, it's going to be harder to read my name, it's going to take them longer to find my name and get to it. Two, they're not going to remember that after, they're going to be remembering how big the directed by was, they're not going to be thinking about the name. The most important information that is going to be on a text slide, you want it to be the biggest. Always the most important. Whatever important information, that should be the biggest on the page. And that's like what you want the viewer's eye to go to first. Your eyes are naturally drawn to whatever is biggest on the screen first, and it goes from there. So think about that when you're making your title slides and decide what's the most important in what you're communicating on that specific page and order your font accordingly. Let's talk about lower thirds. So lower thirds are when in the lower third of the screen there is a name and a title. You usually see them over documentaries or documentary style films. They'll be on the news a lot. A good example is like Chef's Table. So I like to use this example because they did a really good job of being really intentional with their lower thirds, with the font style, the overall design of the lower thirds is very intentional, and it really matches the overall essence of the show, which is very clean, designed, specific, very Michelin star fine dining, all the things that are in that genre of like intense and specific. That's what the font also exemplifies. So thinking about that, that's not gonna go with every single film. Like if you're making a documentary about global warming as, I don't know, something scientific and smart, you might, a font with serifs on it might be more suited to what you're making. That's another thing to think about. That goes into the stylizing of your fonts. Serif versus sans serif, and those communicate different vibes, you know? Sans serif is definitely can be seen as, I would say, more clean and more fun. And then fonts with serifs are usually used for like more like old school or more professional or more structured in a lot of ways. So, you know, for example, Vogue, the magazine, that's a serif font. Another example would be Sully, the movie with Tom Hanks, or a lot of the Marvel films, they also have serifs on their fonts. Some horror movies use fonts with serifs on them. So it's just really intentional and specific. The landscapers are outside. Anyway, it's important to know about serifs versus sans serif, and it's important to pay attention to that because that goes into our other topic, which is readability. Serifs are easier to read, which is why it's traditional, which is why it was used in the Bible, which is why it's used in schools mostly, because your eyes can generally read serif, like fonts with serifs, much faster than sans serif font. So if you have a lot of text to get through on a film, a lot of times they'll put serifs on it. Subtitles nearly always have serifs on them because it's easier to read quicker. And it's just easier for your eyes. I'm so bad at talking. This is hard. Back to lower thirds. Within lower thirds, you're always gonna want the name to be bigger and the title to be smaller because, again, that goes into the type hierarchy conversation we had earlier, where you want people to see their name and like recognize that. But in general, the title of the person it's really important for it to be there, but it's not necessarily as important for the audience to remember. Like you want the audience to be able to attach a name with that person because it gives the audience a chance to connect to that person that they're seeing on the screen, because automatically when you meet someone and you get their name, you're attaching that name to that person, and it gives a level of personability. And by doing that in a film, you're enabling the audience to be able to connect with that person. So having their name and their title, you kind of want to be thoughtful, a little bit strategic about this, because if there's a lot going on the left side of the screen, even though that's typically where you might put the lower third, if there's a lot going on over there, don't put your lower third there, because then the audience is going to be distracted by so much going on and they're probably going to miss something or miss the name entirely, or they won't even be able to see it. So it's completely okay to make that judgment call as you're going. Try as much as possible, obviously, to put them on the left and to be consistent. Like if you can put them all on one side, try to do that. But if it's not possible, like, it's fine. The most important thing is the audience being able to read it. So readability is like, it's hierarchy and readability are probably the two most important, like, quintessential things to keep in mind and remember when it comes to incorporating type and text with your videos. Okay, and this brings me to my last and final point, which is readability as a whole. There's a few different aspects to readability. So there's serifs, which we kind of already touched on and talked about. There's color and outlines, and there's size. So it's very easy to make your font too small, so it's really hard for the viewers to read or see at all, and it's kind of hard to gauge or judge these types of things, because if you're making a film that's going to be shown on a big screen, it's hard to know in advance what the what the size of the font is going to look like on that screen. So a problem that I think filmmakers run into a lot is making their font way too big. You know, this is not one of those situations where the more the merrier. Like, being a little bit frugal and intentional, I guess, with the size of your font. Being more frugal with the size of your font, I guess, is definitely going to be better. So it can be really overwhelming, like if the whole screen is taken up with a word. Sometimes people might choose that stylistically, but most of the time you don't need to do that. And it can end up, I think, detracting from your film or seem lower quality. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no rule book to any of this. It's all about trying to figure out the tone of your film and matching your font with that, so that you're creating an experience for your audience. With film in general, you're creating an experience. And font is easy to overlook because there's so many other things you're thinking about, especially in post-production. You're thinking about editing, color correction, the sound, like you're trying to like focus on all these different things that by the time it's time to put on your credit sequence or your lower thirds or your title sequence, you're just like, oh, fuck it. Like, I'm just gonna like throw up this, you know, title slide and just do whatever the stock font is and like, yep, good to go. No, please, no, please don't do that. Please don't do that. The stock fonts that they put on there are not meant to be used. They are ugly. They are so ugly, and they are not good or effective. They're just there as a placeholder. They're purely there for a placeholder. They are not, because they're not trying to have, the companies aren't trying to have any influence over like what you're creating is when you're using those title slides. It's just there to give you a starting point so you know like where to type and like kind of just giving you a launching pad. It's totally up to you onto like what font you're gonna use and like what style, but you really should do the work of trying to figure out which font is gonna match the tone of your film. Take the time to go through them and find one. It's tedious and it's annoying, but it's always worth it. It is always worth it. And yeah, if you take nothing else away from this video, at least take away that. Like, don't use the stock font. No. That and hierarchy. Hierarchy, bitch. Hierarchy. Hierarchy and don't use the stock font. Those are like that is, if I was going to create a Bible of font information as it relates to text in film, those would be my 2 commandments. Like, try not to use the stock font. Like, aside from size, what affects readability is color, shading, drop shadow, and outline. The obvious solution, if you're having a hard time reading your font out over a really dark scene, you're using black font, it's really hard to see. It's the obvious solution is to make the text white instead of black. But there's certain situations where changing text from black to white to gray, none of it's working. Gray is a good option. Always try to do gray. But if gray doesn't work either, the best way and the most, like, statistically, scientifically, the most readable font is font that has an outline around it. It's ugly. I don't recommend it. It's ugly. However, it's very readable. And if you're making something like subtitles, always do outline. Like, it's really, really important to, when you can, include subtitles on things. Like, at least have a subtitle option, like on YouTube, to be able to include a subtitle option. Really, really important. There's a lot of hard of hearing folks and deaf folks, and it's really, we want them to be able to partake in your film, partake in your art, and experience like what they can of the film and the tone of the film, even without sound. So being intentional about your subtitles is important. Always, always, always on your subtitles have outlines. Always. Because you can't, it's really hard to go through every single scene of the film and make sure that your black, white, or gray font is visible over top of the film. Like, it's not reasonable to do that. It's just as easy to throw, it can be a small outline, it doesn't have to be a huge outline, but just throwing an outline on there really, really helps. The last thing, if you've tried all these things and you're having a hard time, the outline is just too ugly, like if it's not related to subtitles, it's just something else, your main title sequence or your main title screen, and it's just, the best solution is using a drop shadow. People tend to shy away from drop shadows because they can look really ugly. But if you know how to finesse the drop shadow, girl, you've got it made. There are ways to finesse it. I use drop shadows in almost all of my films and you can't tell. You're not supposed to, the point of a drop shadow, you're not supposed to be able to tell it's there. There's drop shadows on everything you see in everyday life. Like, that is natural. It's natural for there to be shadows because where there's light, there's shadows, right? If you can see something, that means there's light. So drop shadows on everything we see in everyday life. So drop shadows are very natural, and there's a way to make them look natural on the film as well. There's an option to change the angle and the distance and the opacity, and you need to adjust all of these. So I try to make the shadow as close to the font as possible while making it still visible. Throw that opacity way down. Way down. It does not need to be like hard line, like just fully visible. It's like clear. It's like you put a light right in front of something. It's super hard shadow. No. You're not trying to do that. You're just trying to make it more readable to the naked eye. And by putting a drop shadow behind it, it's almost like putting a really soft outline that isn't recognizable to the naked eye, but it makes your font naturally more visible. So that's kind of that on that. It's kind of hard to explain it because it's not necessarily super noticeable while I'm making it, but it is noticeable in the overall, you know, at the end of the day, at the end of the film. I highly recommend you just spend some time messing around with drop shadows and seeing what works for you. It does make a difference overall. I promise it does. It does make it easier to see and to read, and that just helps making sure that your viewer is having a more cohesive experience, and it's more inclusive for differently abled parties that might be viewing your film, because you never know who's going to watch it. I feel like this video is a little bit all over the place, so to boil it all down, summarize it, 3 key points. Hierarchy, not using whatever stock font there is, and then worrying about the readability of your font. So whether that be using an outline, using a drop shadow, and the color of font you use. All of these 2 things tie together no matter whether you're doing a lower third, you're doing a title sequence, you're doing the main title slide. The other part that is included with readability is the size. So making sure that you're not making your font too big. Don't make it too big, don't make it too small. There is a happy medium. Most of the time you're gonna naturally lean towards the correct size, so trust your gut, trust yourself on that. If something feels a little too big or a little too small, probably is. And if you're ever like unsure, or even if you're not unsure, even if you're really confident, a good thing to do is to pull up different documentaries or screenshots from documentaries that used lower thirds and just kind of do a side-by-side comparison of how big their lower thirds were compared to yours, if you think it looks right or good. The Jinx is another really good example for lower thirds and documentaries that incorporate that really well. That would be my summary for things you need to know. I guess readability really has 5 points. So it's gonna be outlines, drop shadows, the color of the font, size, and then serif versus sans serif, which obviously that goes into the specific type of font that you're picking, but they really are just 2 separate categories, and it's easier to break down. It makes it a little bit easier to categorize what you're looking for and how long it's going to take you to look through the hundreds upon hundreds of fonts that are incorporated with these different programs. So I definitely highly recommend just deciding right out the gate if you're going to use a serif or a sans serif font, and that's going to make the whole process go a lot faster for you. I think that's all. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this helped a little bit answer some of your questions. Hopefully it wasn't too confusing. If you're watching this, that means that you care about the way your film makes people feel, and you care about the way the type in your film makes people feel. It's a really important part. It's really important to pay attention to it and be inclusive. Keep on paying attention to it. Keep on trying to find tutorials and different videos about it, because it's really important and it's never gonna stop being important. And I think that's all. Thanks for watching. Bye!